On a winter night in the heart of the Cotswolds, the Marquis of Everleigh returns to his abandoned manor, a house haunted not by ghosts, but by regret. Snow falls over forgotten halls, and through the storm he finds what he least expects: a destitute woman and 6 starving children seeking refuge in his home. But as firelight flickers against old stone, something far greater than pity stirs within him, a secret long buried, and a love he never believed he'd feel again. Stay with us for this tale of redemption, sacrifice, and forbidden tenderness. Subscribe now and help us reach 1,000 hearts. Together, we'll keep these timeless romances alive. Cotswolds, Gloucestershire, England, winter of 1813. The wind had teeth that night. It howled through the valley and carried with it the scent of frozen earth, sweeping over the sloping meadows and honey-coloured cottages until it reached the iron gates of Everleigh Manor. Snow lay thick upon the ground, untouched save for a set of deep, uneven tracks leading from the road to the once grand house. The manor stood silent beneath the weight of years and weather, its windows dark, its chimneys long cold. Percy Ashford, the Marquis of Everleigh, reined in his horse before the gates and stared at the place that had once been the pride of his family. He had not set foot there in nearly a decade. The last time he had seen it, the trees were green, and his mother was still alive. Now only the snow remained, a shroud of white, pure and cruel, hiding all evidence of time and neglect. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the drifts. The wind tugged at the hem of his greatcoat, and the horse snorted uneasy. Percy reached for the gate latch and stopped. It was ajar. A jolt of unease cut through him. He pushed the gate open, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside the courtyard. The stone fountain at its center was frozen solid, the angel atop it half buried in snow, but it was not the statue that held his attention. It was the faint glow of firelight flickering from one of the side windows of the ground floor. The manor, abandoned for years, was not empty. He crossed the courtyard quickly, each step crunching on ice, the echo of his boots loud in the night. When he reached the door, he paused to listen. Faint voices, no, whispers, and a child's cough, then another. He pushed the door open. Inside, the air was colder than he remembered, but it carried the unmistakable scent of smoke and bread. A small fire crackled weakly in the hearth, throwing trembling shadows across the stone floor. Around it huddled a woman and 6 children wrapped in worn blankets. The eldest boy stood in front of the others like a guard, his thin shoulders squared, his eyes wide with fear. The woman rose at once. She was tall for a woman, though slight, her posture graceful despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her face. Her hair, dark chestnut with a few loose curls at her temples, was pulled back simply. Her dress, though modest and patched at the sleeves, was clean, but what struck him most were her eyes, grey-green, steady, proud. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "What are you doing in my house?" Her chin lifted. "We meant no harm, my lord," she said softly, her accent gentle but firm. "We sought shelter from the storm. The gates were open, and the roof keeps out the snow. We will leave come morning." "This is Everleigh Manor," Percy replied coldly. "It has not welcomed guests in many years. How long have you been here?" "Since dusk." Her voice trembled only slightly. The children could go no farther. Percy's gaze swept over the group. The youngest child, a girl no older than 2, was asleep in the woman's arms, her lips tinged blue. The others huddled close together, pale with hunger and cold. He swallowed, the words catching somewhere between outrage and pity. "You have no right." "No," she interrupted quietly, "but we had no choice." The answer silenced him. The simple truth of it struck harder than defiance could. He looked around the room again, seeing now the faint traces of care. Snow melted into a pail, a few crumbs of bread, small hands clutching one another for warmth. "What is your name?" he asked at last. "Rosalind Hale." The name stirred something faint in his memory. A teacher's daughter, he thought, once well regarded in the village. But the years had been unkind. He exhaled slowly, his anger cooling in the face of her composure. "You chose a dangerous place to hide, Mrs. Hale. This manor is no sanctuary. Everywhere else refused us," she said simply, "and I no longer have the right to ask favors." Her honesty unsettled him. Few people spoke to him so plainly. "You could have gone to the parish house." "I have been there," she replied, her voice low. "Their charity ends when the sun sets." Silence fell. The fire crackled softly, and one of the children began to cry. Rosalind turned, murmuring comfort, her hand resting gently on the boy's head. The gesture, so natural, so tender, tightened something deep inside Percy's chest. He turned away, trying to reclaim authority. "Very well. You may remain tonight, but in the morning you will leave." "Thank you, my lord." The words were polite, but there was no gratitude in her tone, only relief and a quiet determination that made him feel oddly powerless. He fetched a lantern from the wall, the light flaring across her face. Her eyes shimmered like polished glass, reflecting the flame. For a moment neither spoke. Then he set the lantern on the table and stepped back. "You'll find more blankets in the old servants' wing," he said. "Use what you need." She hesitated, as though uncertain if she should trust the offer. "You are kind, my lord." "I am not kind," he said, more harshly than he intended. "I am merely not cruel." Rosalind looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she bowed her head. "Then we thank you for your mercy all the same." He turned toward the doorway, but paused when he heard her humming softly, a lullaby, fragile as snowflakes. The children's breathing slowed, their small bodies relaxing in the faint warmth. Percy stood in the dark corridor, listening to the song until it faded. He could not remember the last time he had heard a voice so gentle in this house. He went to the study, lit a candle, and poured a measure of brandy. The fire in the hearth there was dead, but he did not bother to rekindle it. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a woman with nothing but her courage had made his cold, empty manor feel, if only for a moment, like a home again. He stared into the flickering flame of the candle and murmured to himself, "What am I to do with you, Mrs. Hale?" In the silence that followed, the wind pressed against the windows like a sigh, and for the first time in years, the Marquis of Everleigh did not feel entirely alone. Morning broke with a timid light, pale and diffused through the thick curtain of winter clouds. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a silence so profound that every creak of wood and flutter of snow against the windows seemed to echo. Inside Everleigh Manor, the air was still heavy with the mingled scents of ash, smoke, and faintly warming bread. It was not the fragrance of grandeur or festivity, but of life returning, cautious and unsteady. Percy Ashford descended the grand staircase, his boots striking the faded runner with deliberate restraint. Each step stirred ghosts of memory, the laughter of servants, his mother's voice calling from the gallery, the faint perfume of Christmas past. But this morning there was something new among those echoes, movement, quiet, purposeful, and foreign to the emptiness that had ruled for so many years. From the open door of the kitchen came the low murmur of voices, children's laughter, and the faint scrape of metal against stone. He paused, unseen for a moment, and watched. Rosalind Hale stood by the hearth, coaxing a small flame into strength. She had shed her heavy shawl, revealing a simple wool dress of muted blue-grey, worn but freshly brushed. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hands steady as she stirred a pot over the fire. The light touched her hair, which glowed chestnut under the weak sun, filtering through the frosted panes. Around her, the 6 children sat close together on the floor, their faces clean now, their expressions bright with the tentative hope of warmth and food. The sight caught him off guard. He had expected the manor to remain bleak, unchanged by one night of occupancy, yet somehow it felt different, softer, more alive. One of the older boys noticed him and froze wide-eyed. Rosalind turned instantly, her hand still on the spoon. "My lord," she said, composed but wary, as though she had half expected him to appear with anger in his eyes. "You are awake early," he observed, stepping inside. "It seemed wrong to let your kitchen grow cold," she answered quietly. "The children needed breakfast, and your pantry, though sparse, offered enough to share." He glanced toward the table, where a few crusts of bread and a pot of thin porridge awaited. It was a meagre meal by any measure, yet somehow, under her care, it looked almost comforting. "You should not have troubled yourself," he said. "I am accustomed to troubling myself, my lord," she replied, her tone polite but edged with truth. The faint defiance in her words made something stir in him, a reminder that pity would be the last thing she would accept. He moved toward the hearth and extended his hands toward the flames, feeling their fragile heat. "The fire burns better today," he murmured. "I used the driest logs I could find," she said. "It seemed a shame to let the house stand silent when warmth could be coaxed from it." Her words struck deeper than she likely intended. He turned to her then, fully, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. The space between them seemed charged with an invisible thread, delicate yet impossible to ignore. A child's giggle broke the silence, and Rosalind turned away swiftly, her cheeks colored by the glow of the fire. Percy found himself strangely disappointed by the interruption. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the pot. She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He took the spoon from her hand, his gloved fingers brushing against her bare ones, and felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. Her skin was cold but soft, her touch lingering only a heartbeat before she stepped back. "The porridge may not be worthy of a marquis," she said softly, attempting a faint smile. "I have tasted worse," he answered. "Far worse." When he handed the spoon back, their fingers nearly met again. The moment passed, fragile and wordless, but it left behind a tension that neither dared to name. The children ate quietly, grateful and shy. Rosalind served each portion before taking her own, waiting until the smallest had finished. Percy watched in silence, uneasy with admiration. She had an elegance that no poverty could strip from her, a grace that came not from breeding, but from endurance. When the meal was done, Rosalind began to tidy the room, her movements careful and deliberate. Percy helped without thinking, lifting a pot from the hearth to the counter. She turned sharply, surprised. "My lord, you need not—" "Do not call me that," he said quietly. "Not when we stand in the same cold room." Her gaze flickered uncertainly. "How else should I address you?" "Percy will do." She looked at him then, as though testing the weight of his words. "Very well, Percy." The name fell from her lips with quiet reverence, as though she were unaccustomed to speaking to any man without fear. The simple sound of it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He cleared his throat. "The village will soon notice smoke from these chimneys. It will not remain a secret that the house is occupied." "I know," she said softly, folding a linen cloth with care. "But I have no wish to cause you trouble. We can leave as soon as the weather allows." He frowned. "And go where?" "Wherever we are not turned away." "Is there such a place?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. The silence between them spoke volumes. He crossed his arms. "You will not be cast into the snow again. You will remain until the storm has truly passed." "My lord Percy," she corrected herself gently, "we have already taken more than we should." "And I have more than I need," he said firmly. "You and your children will stay until you find your footing." "They are not all mine," she said quietly. He looked up sharply. "No, 2 of them were left in my care when their mother died. The rest are mine by birth, but it makes no difference to me. They are all my family." He studied her face then, seeing not a beggar or a trespasser, but a woman who had carried too many burdens alone. "They are fortunate," he murmured. She turned away, her eyes glistening in the light of the fire. "Fortune has little to do with it." Percy could think of nothing to say. He wanted to tell her that she had restored something inside these walls that even he could not name. Instead, He reached for his coat. "I will go to the village," he said. "We need provisions. Bread, oil, coal, perhaps a few necessities for the children." Rosalind looked at him in surprise. "They will speak of you if you are seen purchasing such things." "They have spoken of me since the day I was born," he replied. "It will hardly be the first time." He left before she could protest further. The ride into the village was short, but heavy with thought. Snow muffled the sound of his horse's hooves, and as he passed the familiar cottages, curtains shifted behind frosted windows. He could feel their curiosity, their judgment, their unease. The Marquis of Everleigh had returned, and with him, perhaps, the ghosts of old scandals. At the baker's, conversation ceased when he entered. The shopkeeper bowed awkwardly, hands trembling as he wrapped a loaf of bread. Percy said little, his tone calm but curt. When he asked for children's boots, the man hesitated. "For your servants, my lord." "For those in my care," Percy replied, his gaze steady. When he returned to the manor, the firelight met him before the door opened fully. The smell of stew filled the hall. Rosalind was at the table, mending a sleeve by lamplight. She rose as he entered. "You returned," she said, her voice laced with quiet relief. "Did you think I would not? I have learned not to expect kindness to last." Her honesty pierced him again, sharper than reproach. He set the parcels on the table. "Then perhaps I shall be the one to prove you wrong." She looked at him, uncertain, her expression softening despite herself. "You speak as if you owe us something." "Perhaps I do," he said. Their eyes met and held. The air between them shifted, warm as the glow of the hearth. "Rosalind," he said softly, "I cannot explain why, but this house feels different since you arrived." She lowered her gaze, a faint tremor in her voice. "That difference will fade once we are gone. I am not so sure." The children appeared then, running to see the bread and boots, their laughter filling the kitchen. Percy smiled faintly, an expression that startled them as much as it startled him. Rosalind's eyes caught his, and for the first time she smiled back, not as a beggar but as an equal. When night fell again, the manor seemed transformed. Candles flickered in the windows, the sound of gentle voices echoed through the hall, and somewhere above, the faint hum of Rosalind's lullaby drifted once more. Percy stood in the corridor listening, his hand against the cool wall. He could not have said what bound him to her presence, only that her voice stirred something long buried, a longing not for possession, but for peace. He turned toward the fire and whispered her name under his breath, as though testing its weight. "Rosalind." The word lingered in the air, like a prayer he did not know he was making. The following morning dawned with a deceptive calm, the kind that hides its intentions beneath a thin veil of blue sky. The storm had passed, leaving the land glazed with frost that shimmered like crushed glass under the pale sun. The air was brittle and sharp, each breath turning into a ghost that lingered before dissolving into silence. Inside Everleigh Manor, warmth had begun to seep cautiously through the old stones. The hearths burned again, smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, visible for the first time in years. To those within, it was a sign of life returning. To those in the village below, it was a provocation. Rosalind stood at the narrow kitchen window, her hands clasped before her apron, watching the world beyond the frosted panes. The children's laughter echoed faintly behind her as they sorted dried beans by size, turning the task into a game. She should have felt safe, perhaps even content, yet unease coiled in her stomach. Smoke had its price. People noticed smoke. She did not turn when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew them already, the quiet authority of a man who had spent too long commanding silence instead of company. "You are awake early again," Percy said, his voice calm, still edged with that restrained courtesy he used as armor. "I am used to early mornings," Rosalind replied without looking at him. "In another life, I used to rise with the church bells. Now I rise with the wind." Percy approached the window beside her, his presence both grounding and unsettling. He looked out across the field, the frost glittering like 1,000 needles. "The air is clear today," he said softly. "Too clear. The village will see the chimney smoke." "I know." He turned toward her then, and she felt the weight of his gaze before she met it. "If anyone comes," he said, "you will say nothing. I will speak for you. You do not need to defend me." "No," he said quietly, "but I intend to." Their eyes held for a moment, hers wary, his resolute, and then the sound of approaching wheels broke the fragile stillness. From the courtyard came the crunch of gravel, the low murmur of voices, the creak of carriage wood. Rosalind's breath caught. Through the glass she saw the parish matron, Mrs. Tewkesbury, wrapped in furs like a moral shield, stepping down from a small black carriage. Behind her came two other women, their expressions tight with purpose and superiority. "They have come," Rosalind whispered. Percy's jaw tightened. "Let them in." The knock arrived moments later, firm, officious, the kind of knock that carried judgment before words were even spoken. Rosalind opened the door with measured calm. "Mrs. Tewkesbury," she greeted, bowing her head slightly. "You honor us." The matron's eyes swept over her with the precision of a blade. "Indeed," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "It is not every day one finds this house occupied again. I thought it prudent to ensure all within are well cared for." Her gaze flicked toward the children, who huddled silently near the hearth. The faint curl of her lip betrayed her disgust. "You need not worry," Rosalind said. "They are safe and warm." Mrs. Tewkesbury clasped her gloved hands before her. "Safety and warmth are not the same as propriety, Mrs. Hale. The parish has rules, and charity must never be mistaken for indulgence." Percy entered from the adjoining room, his posture tall, his presence commanding. "Then perhaps, madam," he said evenly, "you should be certain of the difference before you accuse." The women turned, startled. Even Mrs. Tewkesbury faltered for a moment under the weight of his gaze. "My lord," she stammered, recovering her composure, "we did not realize you were returned," Percy finished. "No one did. That was rather the point." Mrs. Tewkesbury straightened. "We only came to ensure that your generosity is not misplaced. This woman's reputation is of no concern to you," Percy interrupted, his tone low but lethal. "Mrs. Hale and the children are under my protection. You will not harass them in my house." The silence that followed was heavy as snowfall. One of the women gasped softly, another turned away in discomfort. Mrs. Tewkesbury's cheeks flushed with outrage. "You would defy the parish for her?" "I would defy anyone," Percy said, "who mistakes cruelty for virtue." The matron's eyes blazed. "Then you risk more than your name, my lord. People talk, they always do." Percy stepped closer. "Then let them talk. It will keep them from idleness." Rosalind stood motionless, her heart pounding. No one had ever spoken for her like this. Not her father, not her late husband, not anyone. It frightened her almost as much as it moved her. When the women finally withdrew, their pride wounded, Percy closed the door with deliberate calm. He leaned against it for a moment, exhaling a breath that misted in the cold air. "They will not forgive that," Rosalind said quietly. "I did not ask their forgiveness." "You do not understand," she murmured, moving toward the fire. "They will punish you for kindness. They will twist it into scandal. Then let them." His voice was firm, but she could hear the tremor beneath it, a mixture of anger and something softer, something dangerously close to care. "Why?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. "Why do you do this for us? You owe us nothing." Percy's eyes met hers. For a long moment he said nothing. The only sound was the steady crackle of fire and the faint laughter of children playing in the next room. "Perhaps I owe you more than you think," he said finally. She shook her head. "You cannot build your redemption on my ruin." His expression darkened, pained. "Do you truly believe that is what I seek? I do not know what to believe any more." Her voice broke slightly, and she turned away. He crossed the room slowly, his footsteps soft against the flagstone. "Then believe this," he said, his voice low, close. "You and these children will not be cast out while I still draw breath." She froze. His presence was suddenly behind her, his warmth tangible in the cold air. She could feel his breath near her ear, the quiet power in his restraint. For a heartbeat neither moved. Then, with a trembling breath, Rosalind stepped away. "If you continue to defend me," she said, "they will destroy you too." "Then let them try," he murmured. The tension between them was electric, unspeakable, fragile, and irresistible. When she turned to look at him again, she saw not the proud Marquis of gossip and scandal, but a man stripped of his armor, raw and uncertain. Their eyes met and held, too long for propriety, too short for satisfaction. Rosalind was the one who broke it, stepping back until the firelight swallowed her shadow. "I should see to the children's lessons," she said quietly. "Of course." He watched her go, the movement of her dress like a sigh of silk and sorrow. When she vanished up the stairwell, he turned toward the window. Outside, 3 villagers stood at the gate, whispering behind gloved hands. One of them pointed toward the smoking chimney. By evening, the whispers had become words, and the words had become venom. At the small inn in the village, the talk was feverish. The Marquis had returned, they said. He had brought a woman into the house, a woman of ill reputation, with a brood of children no one could account for. The old sins of Everleigh were breathing again. When Percy returned from the stables, the servants he had summoned from the neighbouring estate refused to come inside. The air was thick with rumour, with invisible judgment pressing against the manor walls. Rosalind sensed it too. That night, as she tucked the youngest child into bed, she glanced toward the window. Beyond the frost-blurred glass, a faint glow moved through the dark. Lanterns, at least 2, maybe 3, watching. She went downstairs, her steps light but hurried. Percy was in the study, a single candle illuminating his face as he read over an old ledger. He looked up immediately when he saw her expression. "What is it?" "There are people outside," she whispered. "By the fence." He set the candle aside and went to the window. Through the slats, he caught a glimpse of moving lights, the distant murmur of voices. His jaw tightened. "Curiosity has a way of turning into cruelty," he said. "What will you do?" "What I must." He opened the door and stepped into the freezing night. Rosalind followed as far as the threshold, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached the fence. The lanterns wavered, then began to retreat, the voices fading into the trees. When he returned, his hair was dusted with snow, his expression unreadable. "They will come again," she said softly. "I know. You cannot fight them all." He smiled faintly without warmth. "No. But I can make them think twice before they knock on my door again." Rosalind stared at him, torn between fear and admiration. The man she had once imagined as proud and distant now stood before her like a sentinel, defying the world on her behalf. "You should not have to fight for me," she said. "Perhaps I am not fighting for you," he said quietly. "Perhaps I am fighting because of you." She drew in a breath, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. "Do not say such things." "Why not?" "Because I cannot bear to believe them." Percy took a single step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then do not believe them. Feel them." Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence between them was heavy, intimate, trembling with what neither dared confess. Finally she turned away, her voice faint. "Good night, Percy." He watched her ascend the stairs, each step slow, deliberate, as though she were retreating not from danger, but from desire. When she disappeared from sight, he stood alone in the hall, his hands clenched at his sides. The manor was quiet again, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Yet in that silence, something had changed, something fragile and alive, as dangerous as the thaw that follows the longest winter. For the first time since his return, Percy felt the walls breathe with more than memory. And though he would not admit it aloud, he knew the truth with painful clarity. It was not the manor that was waking. It was him. The days that followed passed under a fragile truce between silence and rumour. The manor, long abandoned and shrouded in ghost stories, now breathed with quiet purpose once more. Smoke curled from its chimneys every morning, steady and defiant against the pale winter sky. To the villagers below, that thin grey ribbon meant only one thing. Something forbidden had taken root where propriety had once reigned. Inside those walls, however, life persisted with delicate rhythm. The children had begun to smile again. The youngest girl had colour in her cheeks, and the eldest boy had discovered how to make a proper fire without burning his fingers. Rosalind's laughter, rare and fleeting, sometimes echoed through the corridors like the softest bell, startling Percy each time he heard it. It was early afternoon when he found her in the library. Dust motes swirled lazily in the sunlight that poured through the tall windows, illuminating her figure as she reached for a book from the highest shelf. She balanced on her toes, one hand steadying herself against the ladder, the other stretched upward. The movement was unguarded, graceful, too graceful, and Percy, entering quietly, found himself unable to look away. "Allow me," he said at last. Startled, Rosalind turned, her hand trembling slightly. "My lord." "Percy," he corrected gently. "I thought we had settled that." A faint colour rose to her cheeks. "Yes, I beg your pardon. Percy." The name slipped from her tongue with hesitant warmth. He took the book from the shelf easily and handed it to her. "You should not climb without assistance. Those ladders were made for younger, reckless days." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "I have had plenty of reckless days, my lord, though few of them involved literature." He smiled, the expression softening the severity of his features. "And what volume demanded such bravery?" She lowered her gaze to the cover. "A book of psalms. The children like to hear the verses before bed." "Ah," he nodded. "You mean to bring grace back to this house?" "I mean to bring peace where it can be found," she said quietly, "even for a night." Percy studied her face, noting the way the light touched her profile, the quiet strength in her bearing. He had met women of title, of beauty, of cunning, but never one whose dignity had survived so much ruin. He hesitated before speaking again. "Rosalind, I have considered our situation." "Our situation," she repeated, wary. "The gossip grows," he said simply. "You know it as well as I. The villagers will not rest until they have made monsters of us both." She said nothing, her fingers tracing the spine of the book. "I have a solution," he continued, though the words tasted unsteady. "I will employ you as the housekeeper of Everleigh Manor." Her head lifted sharply. "You would make me your servant." "Not my servant," he replied quickly, his tone firm yet kind. "My equal in responsibility. The title will quiet their tongues, nothing more. It will give you position and respect. They cannot insult what appears proper." Rosalind's eyes flashed. "Proper?" she echoed bitterly. "Nothing I do will ever be proper in their eyes. They condemned me long before I met you. Then let me stand between you and their judgment." "I do not want your shield," she said, her voice trembling with anger she had held for too long. "I have lived enough years beneath the charity of men who mistook pity for kindness. I will not accept it again." Percy's jaw tightened. "Do you think so little of my intentions?" "I think," she said softly, "that kindness from men of your rank always comes with a cost." Her words stung more deeply than she intended. Percy turned away for a moment, staring out the frost-laced window. "Perhaps you are right," he murmured, "but the cost I offer is mine, not yours. Your name deserves safety. I can give that, if nothing else." Rosalind closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. When she opened them, the anger had faded, replaced by a weary sadness. "And what of you, Percy? What will they say when the Marquis of Everleigh hires a disgraced widow and fills his house with her children?" He met her gaze steadily. "They will say what they always say, that I am a fool, that I am damned, I have survived worse." For a long moment neither spoke. Only the sound of the crackling fire filled the silence. Then Rosalind's voice, soft as falling snow. "You would risk your name for mine." He stepped closer, his voice low. "A name means little when it belongs to a man who no longer believes in it." The air between them shifted. Rosalind's breath caught as she met his eyes that no longer looked cold, but alive with something she dared not define. Her pulse quickened, and she turned away, pretending to study the book in her hands. "You should not say such things," she whispered. "They make the world feel dangerous." "Perhaps the world already is," he said. "And perhaps danger is the only proof that we are still alive." Her gaze flickered toward him, and for a fleeting instant their eyes locked. Neither smiled. Neither looked away. The silence grew heavy with all the words they could not say. Then, as if sensing the moment had lingered too long, Rosalind broke away. "I must tend to the children," she said. "Of course." She turned toward the door, but paused when he added, "Rosalind." "Yes?" "If the world must see you as something," he said quietly, "let it be as the heart of this house, not its shadow." Her breath trembled, though she did not answer. When she left, the echo of her footsteps seemed to linger long after the door had closed. That evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Percy sat in the study, his papers spread before him. The fire cast long shadows against the panelled walls. He had not meant to sound so earnest with her, yet something in her defiance both challenged and redeemed him. He had lived years buried beneath pride and regret, yet this woman, this quiet, wounded survivor, had somehow brought light back into rooms he thought long dead. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Rosalind entered, carrying a folded piece of linen. "Forgive the intrusion," she said, her tone composed. "I have mended your gloves. They were torn at the seam." He rose, surprised. "You needn't trouble yourself with my wardrobe." "I find comfort in small labors," she replied. "It keeps the mind from dwelling on what cannot be changed." He took the gloves, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The contact was slight, but enough to awaken that same dangerous warmth in his chest. "Thank you." Rosalind lowered her gaze. "You are welcome, my lord." "Percy," he corrected softly. Her lips parted in a faint smile. "Percy." Then he hesitated, then spoke the thought that had haunted him all day. "You think I am doing this out of pity, but it is not pity that drives me. It is something else entirely." She looked at him, her expression searching. "Then what is it?" He took a slow breath. "Perhaps I am trying to be the man my mother hoped I would become." Something in his tone softened her completely. "Then she would be proud," she whispered. He laughed faintly, though there was no joy in the sound. "I am not so sure of that." "Do not doubt it," she said gently. "No woman could be ashamed of a man who chooses compassion over cruelty." He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "You think me compassionate?" "I think you kinder than you wish to be," she said softly, "and that frightens you." Her words struck him with quiet truth. He stood so near now that he could see the flicker of firelight reflected in her eyes, the tremble of her breath as she spoke. His voice dropped, rougher, almost a whisper. "You read me too easily, Mrs. Hale. I have learned to see what others refuse to show," she murmured. "Then tell me what you see now." Rosalind's throat tightened. "A man who wants to believe in something again." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The sound of the fire, the ticking of the clock, even the whisper of wind outside, all faded beneath the quiet pull between them. His gaze lingered on her face, the delicate curve of her mouth, the steadiness of her breath, despite the storm rising within them both. He took one step closer, close enough that the faint scent of lavender from her shawl mingled with the smoke from the hearth. But when he reached to brush a strand of hair from her cheek, she turned slightly, her voice trembling. "Do not," she whispered. "If you touch me, I may forget how to be strong." His hand hovered for an instant, then withdrew. "Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," she said softly, though her voice quivered with the weight of unspoken feeling. "Only much to endure." He looked at her for a long, unguarded moment, then inclined his head. "Good night, Rosalind." "Good night, Percy." When she left, the door closed with a quiet click, yet the air she left behind felt charged, alive with something unspoken and undeniable. Percy stood by the fire long after her footsteps faded. The gloves she had mended lay in his hands, the faint stitches neat and careful, each one a small act of devotion she would never admit aloud. He traced the seam with his thumb, wondering why such a simple gesture could stir him so deeply. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, silent, endless. Inside Everleigh Manor, the fire burned steady, and in the quiet glow, the house seemed to exhale, as if recognizing the fragile, forbidden tenderness blooming within its walls. And though neither of them dared name it, both felt it growing, an ache as inevitable as winter, and just as impossible to resist. Snow fell again that evening, softer than before, covering the world in a hush that felt almost sacred. The wind had quieted, the fields lay white and still, and Everleigh Manor stood like a dark sentinel against the silvered night. Inside, the firelight danced across the old walls, making the worn portraits seem almost alive, their painted eyes watching as warmth crept back into a house that had known only emptiness for far too long. Rosalind sat near the hearth, her needle pausing mid-stitch as the flames crackled. The children had gone to bed early, their laughter replaced by soft breathing upstairs. The house was calm, yet her mind was not. The quiet had begun to press upon her like a weight. Too many thoughts lingered in it, Percy's words, his gaze, the sound of his voice when it softened without meaning to. She had tried to remind herself that he was a man of title, and she a woman of ruin. But the heart rarely listens to reason when warmth begins to feel like home. The door opened gently, and her breath caught. Percy entered, his greatcoat dusted with snow, his dark hair damp from the wind. The sight of him, framed by the dim corridor, stole something from the air. "You should be resting," she said quietly, setting her work aside. "I could say the same of you," he replied, his voice carrying that calm depth that seemed to fill the room. "I find sleep difficult when the world feels uncertain." "Then we share that flaw," he murmured. He came to stand near the fire, the glow catching the hard lines of his face. He looked weary, though not from labor. It was the kind of weariness that came from carrying memories too long. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was dense, full of things unsaid. The sound of snow sliding from the roof punctuated the stillness. "I remember winters here," Percy said at last, his gaze lost in the flames. Before the house fell silent. There were carols in the hall, laughter at supper, my mother reading aloud while my father pretended not to listen. "I thought then that nothing so alive could ever fade." Rosalind's voice was gentle, "and yet it did." He nodded slowly. "Everything fades when you stop believing it can last." He looked at her then, his eyes a shade of blue that seemed to burn. "Perhaps that is what this house has been waiting for, someone who still believes." She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. "I stopped believing long ago." "You say that," he said quietly, "but I've seen the way you look at those children, as if love itself could keep them alive. You believe, Rosalind. You simply refuse to admit it." The words unsettled her. She wanted to look away, but found she could not. His presence pulled her in like the tide, steady and inevitable. He stepped closer, and the distance between them shrank until she could feel the warmth of his nearness. Her pulse raced. "You should not speak to me like this," she whispered. "Like what?" "Like a man who forgets who he is." Percy smiled faintly. "Perhaps forgetting is what I need." She tried to move, but his gaze held her in place. "You are a marquis," she said softly, "and I am only a woman the world has chosen to forget." "Then let the world forget us both," he said, just for a moment. The words hung in the air, dangerous and tender. But before either could say more, a sound broke the stillness, a sharp, deliberate knock at the door. Rosalind flinched. Percy straightened instantly, every trace of softness replaced by cold vigilance. "Stay here," he said quietly. She rose, her hand gripping the back of the chair. "Who would come at this hour?" "I intend to find out." He crossed the hall and opened the door. The wind rushed in, carrying a swirl of snow and the faint scent of rain on the air. A man stood on the threshold, cloaked in darkness and dripping with melted frost. His hat shadowed most of his face, but when he spoke, his voice was familiar in a way that made Rosalind's heart falter. "Evening, my lord," the stranger said. "Forgive the intrusion. I am looking for Mrs. Hale." Percy's expression hardened. "You are addressing the wrong house. I was told she sought refuge here," the man continued, stepping forward, "and that she has children in her care, children who do not belong to her." Rosalind's blood turned to ice. Percy's voice was quiet, but dangerous. "Who are you?" "Edward Sedgwick," the man replied smoothly. "Former steward of the Everleigh estate. I've come on parish business." Rosalind moved to the doorway before she could stop herself. "You have no right to be here," she said, her voice trembling but clear. Sedgwick smiled thinly. "On the contrary, madam, I have every right. The parish has taken note of your situation. A widow, living under the roof of a marquis, with children not your own? It raises questions." Percy's tone cut through the air like steel. "You will leave this house." "Not until I have the truth," Sedgwick said, his eyes gleaming. "The vicar's wife claims the children are the orphans of Mr. Hale's debtors. You took them in, did you not? Without permission, without guardianship. The parish may decide to remove them." Rosalind stepped forward, her face pale but her voice steady. "I will not let you take them." Sedgwick smirked. "You have no authority to decide." "Then I do," Percy said. "While they stand beneath my roof, they are under my protection. If you intend to challenge that, I suggest you bring a warrant." The two men stared at each other, the air between them sharp as glass. "Be careful, my lord," Sedgwick said at last, his tone oily. "You are already a subject of gossip. A man in your position cannot afford another scandal." Percy's jaw tightened. "Get out." Sedgwick's gaze lingered on Rosalind, his smile cruel. "This will not end here." He turned and vanished into the snow, leaving the door swinging open behind him. Percy closed it with a slam, his breath clouding in the cold air. He turned toward Rosalind, his voice low but urgent. "Do not be afraid." "I am not afraid for myself," she said, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her shawl. "Only for them." "I will not let him touch those children," Percy said fiercely. "Nor you." Rosalind met his eyes, the firelight flickering across both their faces. "He knows something," she whispered. "He would not have come otherwise. That man has always been poison." Percy frowned. "You know him?" "I knew of him," she said quietly. "He worked for your father once." "My husband dealt with him before he died. There were debts, papers signed in desperation." His expression darkened. "Then he means to use that against you." "Against us both," she corrected. For a long time neither spoke. The flames in the hearth had burned low, their light deepening to amber. Percy moved closer, his voice soft now, stripped of command. "Rosalind, whatever comes of this, you are not alone anymore. You understand that?" Her breath hitched, and for a moment the resolve in her eyes wavered. "You should not make promises you cannot keep." "I intend to keep this one," he said. Something inside her gave way then, a small surrender, quiet but undeniable. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you care so much what becomes of me?" He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "Because," he said softly, "every time I see you, I remember what it feels like to hope again." Her heart stilled. The words, so simply spoken, struck her like a confession she was not ready to receive. "Percy," she whispered, "you must not what?" His voice lowered, almost tender. "Tell you the truth. Look at you the way I do now. Feel what I feel." "You do not know what you are saying." He smiled sadly. "I know exactly what I am saying, and I have known it for longer than you think." The air between them trembled. She stepped back, shaking her head as though to clear it. "You mustn't speak like that," she said. "It is dangerous." "Then let it be dangerous," he said quietly. "Life has been too safe for too long." Before she could reply, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, not from the heavens, but from the echo of something heavier, perhaps the sound of a distant cart on frozen ground. Percy turned toward the window, tension snapping back into his frame. "Whatever Sedgwick intends," he said, He will not find this house unguarded. Rosalind watched him as he stoked the fire and checked the locks, her heart heavy with gratitude and something deeper, more perilous. He was a man at war with his own restraint, and she, though terrified, could not deny how her spirit reached toward his warmth. When at last the house fell quiet again, Rosalind stood by the window, watching the snow fall in endless silence. Behind her, Percy lingered in the doorway, the flicker of firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. "Will you rest?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her eyes luminous in the dim light. "If I do, it will not be from peace, but exhaustion." He smiled faintly. "Then rest knowing this. Nothing shall harm you while I am here." Her voice broke into a whisper. "That is what frightens me most." Percy frowned. "Why?" "Because I believe you." Their eyes met, holding too much longing, too much fear, and yet a tenderness neither could disguise. For a moment, the storm outside and the world beyond seemed to fade entirely. When Rosalind finally turned away, Percy remained where he stood, his heart pounding like a man who had glimpsed something both divine and forbidden. The night pressed close around Everleigh Manor. The fire burned low, and through the glass, snowflakes gathered silently against the window panes. The past had come knocking, but so too had something far more dangerous, the awakening of love itself. The snow melted slowly that week, and with it the illusion of calm that had briefly settled over Everleigh Manor. The days stretched grey and uncertain, the sky heavy with the promise of yet another storm. Within the house, the fire burned day and night, but even its warmth could not quiet the restlessness growing in Rosalind's heart. She had known peace here, a fragile peace built from borrowed time, yet she could not mistake it for belonging. The memory of Mr. Sedgwick's visit lingered like smoke, poisonous, inescapable, and she felt the invisible walls closing in. Wherever she went, the whispers of the village followed. Widow Hale, the Marquis's charity case, a woman who did not know her place. Percy had gone into the village that morning, and his absence left an ache she would not name. She busied herself with the children's lessons in the drawing room, her voice calm and patient as they recited letters and numbers. Yet her thoughts wandered to the man who had defended her with more conviction than she had ever defended herself. When he returned near dusk, she heard the familiar rhythm of his steps before the door even opened. The children rushed to greet him, their laughter filling the hall like birdsong after rain. He smiled, an expression that seemed to grow easier with each passing day, and handed the eldest boy a parcel. "For you," he said, "a new primer and some sweets." The children's eyes lit with delight. Rosalind's heart ached at the sight. He was too generous, too kind. He was doing for them what she could not do for herself, making them feel worthy of care. As the children scattered, she lingered in the hall, watching him remove his gloves. "You should not have gone to the village today," she said softly. "They will talk." "They already do," he replied. "And I am weary of silencing myself for the comfort of others." Rosalind approached him slowly, her hands folded before her. "What did they say?" "The same as always," he answered, unbuttoning his coat. "That I am a fool, that you have ensnared me, that Everleigh is doomed to repeat its disgrace." Her breath caught. "And you let them speak so?" He looked at her, his gaze calm but fierce. "Would you have me fight every tongue in Gloucestershire?" "Their words mean nothing, Rosalind." "They will ruin you," she whispered. "Then let them try," he said quietly. "I have survived worse ruin than this." The way he said her name, soft, deliberate, made her knees weaken. She looked away, retreating a step toward the stairwell. "You cannot stand between me and the world forever." "Perhaps not," he said, his tone low, "but I can stand beside you." Rosalind's chest tightened. "You do not understand. A man like you cannot afford such loyalty. You have your title, your land, your duty, and what are they worth?" he interrupted gently. "If I must live them alone." The silence that followed was unbearable. She could not answer him. The truth was there, in the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, in the quiet ache of his voice, But love, she knew, was not a gift that life gave freely. When he spoke again, his tone was practical, steady, as if determined to redirect the conversation. "I have been repairing the West Wing," he said. "It will soon be habitable again. I thought the children might use one of the rooms for their schooling." She frowned faintly. "You think of everything." "Not everything," he admitted. "Only what matters." His words landed between them like a confession. She turned away, unable to bear the tenderness in his voice. That night, she lay awake long after the house had gone quiet. Moonlight spilled through the narrow window, silvering the floorboards. The wind whispered against the glass, and in that fragile stillness she made her decision. She could not stay. Percy's kindness was not a refuge. It was a noose of gratitude tightening around her heart. She had survived on her own strength for too long to let affection undo her. If she stayed, she would bring him ruin, and she could not bear to be the reason another man lost everything. When dawn broke, she dressed silently, gathering what little she owned. Her hands shook as she folded the children's clothing, their laughter echoing in her mind. They would wake soon. She could not face their eyes. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard his voice. "Going somewhere." Her heart stopped. Percy stood at the base of the stairs, his expression unreadable, though his eyes told the story she had hoped to avoid. "I did not mean to wake you," she said softly. "You were not meant to leave at all," he replied. She gripped the rail, forcing calm into her voice. "It is better this way, for you, for all of us." He took a step toward her. "Better?" His tone was quiet, but sharp. "You believe that running from kindness is the same as protecting it." "I am not running," she said. "I am freeing you." "From what?" "From me." The words broke something in her, and she turned her face away so he would not see her tears. Percy's voice gentled, but the emotion beneath it was raw. "Do you truly think I would let you walk into the cold with 6 children to your name and call that mercy?" "You cannot stop me," she whispered. "I will not destroy what little peace you have rebuilt." He took another step. "Rosalind, look at me." She hesitated, then obeyed. His gaze held hers with unbearable tenderness. "I have lived half my life trying to prove myself to people who never cared," he said. "Let me do something that matters now." "You already have," she murmured. "You gave me shelter. You gave the children hope. That is enough." "It is not enough," he said fiercely. "Not when you mean more to me than I can put into words." Her breath caught. "Do not say that." "Why not?" "Because it cannot be." "Then tell me why," he demanded softly. "Tell me what law of the world forbids me from loving you." She shook her head. "You mistake gratitude for love." "I know the difference," he said, his voice low, steady. "Gratitude fades. This does not." His hand reached for her then, not in command but in supplication. His fingers brushed hers lightly, so lightly she could have pretended it was an accident. But it was no accident. The touch was deliberate, reverent, and it shattered what remained of her resolve. "Percy," she whispered, "please." "You cannot go," he said. "Not like this." "I must," she breathed. "If I stay, the world will make you pay for it." "Let it," he said. "I will not lose you to their cruelty." The emotion in his voice was too much to bear. She pulled her hand away, trembling. "You speak as if love were enough to fight the world. It is not." He looked at her, his eyes shining with the pain of truth. "Then let it be enough to fight the night." Her tears fell freely now. "You will regret this." "I have regretted every day I lived without feeling," he said. "I will not regret you." The room fell silent but for their breathing, uneven and shallow. The morning light filtered through the frost-dusted windows, painting them in soft gold. Finally, Rosalind stepped back. "You must let me go." Percy shook his head. "I will not." She lifted her chin, the quiet strength returning to her voice. "Then at least promise me one thing." "Anything. Do not follow." The plea broke him more than anger ever could. He stood frozen as she turned, her cloak sweeping the floor, the sound of her footsteps echoing like a heartbeat fading into distance. When she reached the door, she paused. "Thank you," she said softly, "for reminding me that kindness still exists." Then she was gone. Percy stood in the empty hall, the light from the open doorway spilling across the floor. He felt as though something vital had been torn from him, leaving behind a silence deeper than any he had known before. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky the color of pewter. Rosalind walked down the long path toward the gate, her figure small against the expanse of white. He watched until she disappeared into the mist, his hands clenched at his sides. He could not move, not yet. The clock in the corridor struck 9, its chime echoing through the empty manor. The sound was unbearable. He turned toward the window, his breath fogging the glass, and whispered into the quiet, "You cannot ask me not to follow, Rosalind." But even as he said it, he knew he would obey for now. Not out of weakness, but because love, real love, required restraint. That night, the house felt emptier than ever before. The fire burned, but the warmth did not reach him. The walls, once alive with laughter, seemed to close in with the weight of absence. In her small chamber, the children slept uneasily, murmuring her name in their dreams. And in the great hall below, Percy sat by the dying fire, her voice still echoing in his mind, soft, trembling, unforgettable. He did not know where she would go, or what danger she might face, only that his heart had gone with her. And as the snow began to fall again, he whispered into the darkness, as if she could somehow hear him. "Come back to me, Rosalind. Wherever you are, come back." The storm returned the night Rosalind left Everleigh Manor. Snow swept across the fields with a ferocity that made the trees bend and the chimneys groan. The wind howled through the eaves as if mourning her absence, and the old house, once full of flickering life, stood silent again, stripped of warmth and laughter. Percy sat by the fire, unmoving. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. Still he did not move. Every sound in the house reminded him of her, the soft rustle of fabric, the faint hum of her lullabies that once echoed from the upper floor, the whisper of her voice saying his name as if it meant something more than courtesy. He told himself she would find shelter before the storm worsened, that she was strong enough to endure the cold. But each hour that passed hollowed that conviction. He had promised not to follow, yet promises meant little when the woman who had awakened his heart wandered the countryside in winter. By morning, he could bear it no longer. He ordered the groom to saddle his horse, but the man hesitated. "Begging your pardon, my lord," he said, "but the roads to the village are near impassable. The drifts are higher than the fence posts." Percy met his gaze, his voice steady but iron-willed. "Then I shall ride through them." Within moments he was gone, the horse's hooves breaking through the crusted snow, his cloak snapping in the bitter wind. The air was sharp enough to sting his lungs, yet he rode on, scanning the empty horizon for any sign of her. The world had turned white and endless, the silence so vast it seemed capable of swallowing hope whole. When he reached the edge of the village, the streets were deserted. Doors were bolted, smoke curled from a few chimneys, but no one ventured outside. The innkeeper, startled by the Marquis's sudden arrival, bowed hastily as Percy entered. "I seek Mrs. Hale," Percy said without preamble. "Has she been seen?" The man hesitated, glancing toward the hearth. "A woman passed through early this morning, wrapped in a grey cloak, walking north. She had children with her." "How long ago?" "Before dawn." Percy turned without another word, mounting his horse again. He rode north, following the faint trail of footprints half buried by the snow. They led along the road for a while, then veered toward the woods, where the drifts were shallower but the cold more biting. Hours passed. The wind scoured his face, his hands numbed despite the gloves, yet he pressed on. Then, through the flurry of snow, he saw it, a small shape near the line of trees, a flicker of movement, a dark bundle against the white. His heart surged. "Rosalind!" he called, his voice cutting through the storm. She turned, startled, her hair loose beneath the hood, her face pale from the cold. The children clung to her skirt, shivering. "Percy!" she breathed, disbelief in her voice. "You should not be here." He dismounted and strode toward her. "You should not be here," he countered, his tone sharper than he intended. "Are you mad, walking into this weather with children at your side?" Her chin lifted in defiance, though her lips trembled. "I had no choice. I could not remain in a house that was never mine." "Then you would rather die in a field," her eyes flashed. "Better to die free than to live indebted." The words pierced him, not because they were cruel, but because they were hers. Honest, proud, and unbearably brave. He took her by the arms, his touch firm but careful. "You owe me nothing," he said quietly. "Nothing except your life, which I will not let you throw away. Do not pity me," she whispered. "I do not pity you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am furious with you." The children stared in silence, their wide eyes darting between them. One began to cry softly, and Rosalind turned to comfort him, her hands shaking as she gathered the child close. The sight undid Percy completely. "Enough," he said. "You are coming back." She looked up at him, her lashes dusted with snow. "No." "Yes," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "If not for yourself, then for them." She hesitated, her resolve faltering as she glanced at the children, their faces red from the cold. "They will suffer if I resist you," she said quietly. "They will suffer if you refuse." The storm howled around them, yet for a heartbeat, the world seemed still. Her gaze locked with his, and in that moment all the words they had not spoken burned between them. Fear, longing, the ache of two souls who had both lost too much to risk believing in love again. At last, Rosalind nodded faintly. "Very well," she said, "but only until the storm passes." He gave a humorless laugh. "You have said that before." "Then I will say it again," she replied softly, "and I will mean it, even if you refuse to listen." He said nothing, only wrapped his cloak around her shoulders and lifted the smallest child into his arms. "We ride together," he said simply. The journey back was slow, the snow thick and blinding. Rosalind rode behind him, one arm around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. She tried not to feel the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her hand, but the warmth of him, the solidity, made it impossible to remember why she had ever thought distance would save her. When they finally reached Everleigh Manor, the storm was already easing. He lifted her from the horse before she could protest, his hands lingering a moment longer than propriety allowed. "You are frozen," he murmured. "I will warm," she said, though her voice trembled. He looked at her for a long, searching moment. "You always say that," he said quietly, "but I wonder if you believe it." Before she could answer, the children ran ahead into the hall, their laughter breaking the tension like a spark of light. Rosalind followed them, her skirts brushing the floor, while Percy remained by the door, watching the snow melt from his gloves. Inside, the fire blazed high again. She removed her cloak, her hair tumbling loose, damp from melted snow. For the first time since she had left, she allowed herself to breathe. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly, not looking at him. "Why chase me when I keep trying to leave?" He approached her slowly. "Because every time you leave, you take something with you." She turned to face him, her expression unsteady. "And what would that be?" "My peace," he said simply. Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to dismiss it as the words of a man carried away by winter and loneliness. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth there, raw, unguarded, terrifying in its honesty. "You should not say such things," she whispered. "They make the air too heavy to breathe." He smiled faintly. "Then let us suffocate together." She drew in a sharp breath. "You mock me." "I never could," he said. For a long moment they stood in silence, the firelight flickering between them like a living thing. Rosalind's heart beat so loudly, she thought he might hear it. She wanted to step back, but her body refused. Every inch of her ached for the safety she felt in his presence, the safety she feared would destroy them both. Finally she spoke, her voice low and trembling. "I cannot stay, Percy. Once the weather clears, I will go." He exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "And if I asked you not to, I would still go." He nodded, though pain flickered in his eyes. "Then I will not ask, but I will not pretend to approve." She looked at him, her throat tightening. "Why do you make this so difficult?" "Because I have spent too many years surrounded by people who made things easy," he said softly, "and none of them ever made me feel alive." Her hand rose slightly, as if to touch him, but she stopped herself. "You will regret these words." "I have regretted everything except this," he said. The truth of it silenced her. The storm had ended outside, but the one inside her heart raged on, relentless and wild. That night, long after the children had fallen asleep, Rosalind stood by the window of her chamber, watching the moon rise over the snow. The sky was clear again, pale and merciless. In the courtyard below, she saw Percy walking the grounds alone, his figure dark against the silver landscape. He paused once, looking up toward the house, as if he knew she was there. Their eyes met across the distance, two souls caught in the same impossible orbit. She closed the curtains slowly, her hands trembling. "You must not hope," she whispered to herself. But even as she spoke, her heart betrayed her. And below, Percy lingered in the snow, unable to turn away, whispering to the cold night air the words he could not yet say aloud. "I will wait for you, Rosalind, until you find your way home again." Spring came late to Gloucestershire that year. The snow lingered along the edges of the fields, like a ghost reluctant to leave, and the trees, though budding, still bore the colour of ash. Within Everleigh Manor, the light was softer now, the air gentler, but peace remained a fragile thing, something that could shatter with a word. Rosalind moved quietly through the house, her presence a quiet order amidst the chaos of renewal. The children laughed again, their cheeks glowed with health. She had thought of leaving many times since the storm, yet each dawn found her still beneath the same roof. She told herself it was for their sake, for the safety Percy had given them, but deep in her heart she knew the truth. She had begun to belong to that house, and to him. He never pressed her. Percy kept his distance, though every glance betrayed the battle within him. There were mornings when he would pass her in the corridor, and their shoulders would almost touch, that infinitesimal space between them humming with words unsaid. Other nights, she would hear him pacing the hall outside her chamber, as though proximity alone could calm what burned between them. It was one such night, when rain pattered softly against the windows, that everything changed. Rosalind was sitting by the fire in the drawing room, mending one of the boys' shirts. The hour was late, and the candle beside her had begun to gutter. She worked slowly, deliberately, her mind restless despite the quiet. Each stitch felt like an attempt to hold herself together. The door opened with a soft creak. Percy entered, still dressed from supper, the top button of his waistcoat undone, his expression weary but intent. "I thought you had retired," she said, surprised by the tremor in her own voice. "I could not sleep," he admitted. "The rain reminds me of the night you arrived." She smiled faintly. "Then I should think the sound comforts you now, for that night began your redemption, did it not?" He studied her closely. "Redemption of the house," she corrected gently, "not of the man." He crossed the room slowly, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "And what of the man?" he asked. Her hand stilled. "The man seeks what cannot be his. And you believe that?" "I must," she whispered. He came to stand beside her, the scent of rain and cedar clinging to him. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze tracing the curve of her profile, the delicate tension in her hands. "You speak as though you are certain," he said softly, "and yet your eyes tell a different story." "Do not read me so easily," she murmured. "It is cruel." "Cruel," he repeated, leaning slightly closer. "Then why do you not turn away?" Rosalind rose abruptly, setting the shirt aside. "Because you leave me no air to breathe when you speak like this." He stepped back, though the pain in his face betrayed his restraint. "Forgive me. I forget myself." "No," she said, her voice low but steady. "You remember too much." The silence stretched between them, long and heavy. The only sound was the rain and the faint ticking of the clock. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer now. "There is something I must tell you." Rosalind turned, her brow furrowing. "If it is another kindness, spare me. I have no strength left for gratitude." "It is not kindness," he said. "It is truth." He moved closer, stopping just before her, the flicker of the fire catching in his eyes. "You believe that I took you in out of pity, or guilt, or perhaps to silence my own loneliness. But the truth, Rosalind, the truth is that I have come to need you." Her breath hitched. "You must not say that." "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because it is improper, because it is dangerous, or because it is what you feel as well." She turned away, her hand pressed to her chest. "You speak of things that cannot exist between us." He took another step forward, his voice low, urgent. "They already do. You cannot deny it. You think I do not see how your hands tremble when I am near, how you avoid my eyes as though they might betray you." Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might break free of her ribs. "You imagine too much." "Then tell me I am wrong," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Look at me and tell me you feel nothing." She lifted her gaze to his, and the world seemed to stop. The air thickened, the rain faded, and in that instant, every emotion she had buried since the night she entered his house rose to the surface: fear, longing, hope, despair. "I cannot," she whispered. Percy's jaw tightened, his breath shallow. "Then do not ask me to feel less." For a moment neither moved. The fire crackled softly, the shadows flickering across their faces like ghosts of the past. Finally, Rosalind turned away, her voice trembling. "You must stop, Percy. You must." "Why?" "Because if you do not, I will not survive it." The confession slipped out before she could stop it. The weight of it hung between them, terrible and tender. Percy reached out slowly, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shiver through her entire body. "Rosalind," he said quietly, "when I first saw you by that fire months ago, I thought you were a ghost sent to haunt me. I did not know then that you would save me instead." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Do not make me your salvation." "Then what should I make you?" She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "A memory. Something I can keep when I must go." He flinched, as though struck. "You still speak of leaving?" "I must. The world will never forgive us if I stay." "I no longer care what the world forgives," he said fiercely. "You should," she said, her voice breaking, "because I cannot bear to watch it destroy you." He shook his head, his hand tightening around hers. "You think too little of me, Rosalind. You think I fear scandal or disgrace. I have lived through both. What I fear now is emptiness, a life without you." Her tears fell then, silently, one by one. "You must not say these things." "Then tell me how to stop." She looked at him for a long moment, torn between longing and terror. "You cannot." The words undid them both. He reached for her face, his fingers trembling as they brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then forgive me," he murmured, "for not trying harder." Their eyes met, and in that charged stillness, all restraint dissolved. He leaned closer, the warmth of his breath mingling with hers, but before their lips could meet, she turned her face away, her voice breaking into a sob. "No," she whispered, "please, if you love me, do not." He stopped instantly, his chest heaving. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. "You ask for mercy," he said softly, "but you are the only mercy I have known." Her tears fell harder now. "You will hate me for this." "I could never," he said. She stepped back, shaking her head as if to banish the moment. "We cannot change who we are, Percy. You were born to the light, and I have lived too long in the shadow. The world will never let them meet." He took a step toward her, his voice steady despite the ache in it. "Then let the world turn its back." "I will not. You speak as though love were a rebellion." "It is," he said simply. She looked at him, searching for anger, for pride, for something that would make it easier to turn away, but there was only tenderness. That was what frightened her most. At last, she whispered, "You do not understand the cost." "Then teach me," he said. Rosalind closed her eyes, her hand clutching the edge of the chair for balance. "The cost," she said softly, "is everything." The room fell silent again, heavy with the echo of her words. The candle sputtered, the flame shrinking low, and in its dim light, Percy saw her as she truly was, not a woman to be pitied, but one to be revered. He bowed his head slightly. "Then let me pay it," he said. Her voice broke. "Do not say that unless you mean it. I have never meant anything more." The clock chimed once, the sound long and mournful. Rosalind turned away, unable to bear the sight of him. "Good night, Percy." He did not stop her this time. He watched her walk toward the door, her figure haloed in the soft glow of firelight. When the latch clicked and she was gone, he sank into the chair she had left behind, his heart still echoing with her voice. Outside, the rain began to ease, replaced by the soft promise of dawn. But inside Everleigh Manor, no dawn could touch the darkness that had settled between them, a darkness made not of despair, but of love too fierce to be spoken aloud. And as the last candle flickered out, Percy whispered into the silence what he could not tell her face to face. "If love is my ruin, then so be it, for I was ruined the moment I met you." Morning came grey and heavy over Everleigh Manor, cloaking the valley in mist. The rain had ceased, but the air carried its memory, cool, damp and trembling with silence. Inside the great house, everything seemed subdued, as though even the walls had heard the words spoken the night before and dared not breathe too loudly. Rosalind moved through the corridors like a ghost of herself. Her hands were steady, her voice composed as she directed the children through their morning routine, but her heart beat with an ache that refused to quiet. Each echo of her footsteps reminded her of Percy's voice, his confession, the touch that had almost bridged the impossible distance between them. She had prayed for the strength to forget. Instead, the morning light only made everything sharper. The warmth in his eyes, the tremor in his voice, the unbearable truth that love had bloomed where it never should have taken root. When she entered the dining room, Percy was already there. He stood near the window, his back to her, the pale light outlining the strong lines of his shoulders. He turned as she entered, and for an instant their eyes met. It was enough to summon all that had passed between them, the longing, the restraint, the truth. Neither dared speak again. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, his voice low. He gestured to the table. "I had breakfast brought in. The children should eat before the rain returns." She nodded, grateful for the civility that masked their turmoil. The children soon filled the room with chatter, their laughter a fragile barrier against the tension that pulsed between the two adults. Percy barely touched his food. He watched them in silence, his mind far from the table. When the meal was done and the children dismissed, the room emptied, leaving him alone with Rosalind once more. She began gathering the dishes, though it was unnecessary. The servants would have done so. It was a pretext to avoid looking at him. "You need not busy yourself," he said quietly. "I prefer it," she replied. "It keeps my thoughts from wandering." "Do they wander far?" Her hands stilled. "Too far." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "Then let them rest, just for a moment." "I cannot," she said, her tone almost pleading. "If I stop, I will remember." "Perhaps remembering is not a curse," he said. "Perhaps it is what keeps us alive." She turned to him then, her eyes glistening. "No, Percy, it is what destroys us." He said nothing for a long moment, the silence thick as fog between them. Then, with quiet resolve, he said, "I would rather be destroyed by truth than saved by silence." Her breath caught. She wanted to answer, to push him away with words, but the sincerity in his gaze robbed her of speech. The clock struck 9, its chime echoing through the still air. Percy broke the silence first. "The parish has sent word," he said. "Mr. Sedgwick intends to return. With others." Rosalind paled. "What do they want?" To see the house, to question your right to remain. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Then it begins. He took a step forward. You have nothing to fear. I will face them. You cannot, she said. Not again. You have risked enough for me. He gave a bitter smile. Do you still not understand? There is no measure of enough where you are concerned. Please, she whispered, her eyes glistening, do not say such things. If they hear even a whisper of what they already suspect, they will ruin you. Let them, he said simply. They cannot take what they did not give me. Her voice trembled. And what is that? He looked at her then, his expression raw, unguarded. My heart. The air between them seemed to collapse. Rosalind drew back a step, as if the force of his words had struck her. She wanted to deny it, to summon the cold composure that had shielded her for so long, but it was no use. Every wall she had built crumbled under the weight of what they both knew. Percy, she whispered, you must not speak this way, not here, not now. There will never be a time or place that makes it right, he said, his voice breaking. So I will speak it while I still can. Her eyes filled with tears. You speak as though the world were ending. For me, it already has. She turned away, her hands trembling. Do not make this harder than it already is. I'm not the one making it hard, he said, his tone softening. You are, by pretending we are strangers. She closed her eyes, fighting the tears. We are not strangers. That is the tragedy of it. The sound of carriage wheels interrupted them, a slow, deliberate roll across the gravel outside. Rosalind froze. Percy's jaw tightened. They're early, he said. From the window he saw two figures emerging. Mr. Sedgwick, in his dark cloak and smug expression, and beside him the parish warden, grave and self-important. Behind them, a third figure, a woman in grey, her bonnet severe. Rosalind recognized her instantly. Mrs. Tewkesbury, she murmured. Of course. Percy turned to her. Stay here. No, she said, her voice firm. This concerns me. I will not hide behind you like a criminal. He hesitated, then nodded. Very well. But whatever they say, do not let them see your fear. When the knock came, it was loud and officious. Percy opened the door with a calm that masked his fury. Mr. Sedgwick, he said, I had hoped our last conversation would suffice. Sedgwick smirked. I fear not, my lord. We come on official business. The parish is concerned about the matter of Mrs. Hale and her dependents. Mrs. Tewkesbury stepped forward, her eyes cold. It is highly irregular for a woman of her station to reside under your roof, particularly with children not her own. Rosalind met her gaze steadily. They are my family, whether by blood or by choice. How noble, Mrs. Tewkesbury said with a sneer, but charity can become scandal when misplaced. Percy's voice cut through the air. Then let me be the scandal, madam. Leave her out of it. Sedgwick smiled thinly. You protect her with such zeal, my lord. It gives the appearance of impropriety. Percy stepped forward, his tone dangerously quiet. Choose your words carefully. I merely speak what others already whisper, Sedgwick replied, and whispers once started are difficult to silence. Rosalind's hands tightened into fists. You take pleasure in cruelty. Sedgwick bowed mockingly. I take pleasure in truth. Before Percy could reply, Mrs. Tewkesbury raised a hand. Enough. The parish has decided. Mrs. Hale will be relocated to the charity house in Stroud. The children will be placed with suitable families. Rosalind's breath left her. No. Percy's fury was instant, blazing. Over my dead body. Then it may come to that, Sedgwick said coldly. For a long moment silence filled the room. The fire crackled faintly. The rain began to patter once more against the windows. Rosalind stood motionless, her mind spinning. Then, gathering her courage, she lifted her chin. If it is decided, then I will go, she said quietly. Percy turned to her, incredulous. No. She met his eyes, her own filled with quiet pain. You cannot fight them all. The children must not suffer for our defiance. He reached for her hand. You think surrender will protect them. It will protect you, she said softly. Her calm broke something in him. "Do not do this," he pleaded. "Do not throw yourself to wolves who feed on virtue." Her voice trembled but did not falter. "You once told me that love is a rebellion. Then let mine be silence. Let it save what yours cannot." He stared at her, speechless. Then with a voice hoarse from restraint, he said, "I will not let you leave." "You may have to," she whispered. Mrs. Tewkesbury cleared her throat, her tone smug. "If the lady is ready, the carriage waits." Rosalind turned toward them. Her face was pale, her eyes luminous with unshed tears, but her posture was unyielding. "Give me a moment to gather the children." When she had gone, Percy faced them, his voice trembling with fury. "If you take her from this house, you take the last good thing left in it." "Then perhaps it is best," Sedgwick said coolly. "You have grown too fond of ghosts." The door closed behind them with the sound of finality. Rosalind returned a few moments later. The children gathered around her. Their eyes were wide, confused. Percy knelt before the eldest boy. "You will be brave," he said softly, "and you will remember that this is your home, no matter where they send you." The boy nodded, though tears glistened on his lashes. Rosalind turned to Percy, her voice breaking. "I will not forget what you have done for us." He looked at her, the words dying on his lips. "Rosalind!" She shook her head. "Do not make this harder." "I love you," he said, the words raw, unrestrained. She closed her eyes, as if the sound of it cut too deep. "Then love me enough to let me go." And with that, she stepped into the waiting carriage. Percy watched as it rolled away down the muddy road, his heart pounding like thunder. The mist swallowed the figures until nothing remained but the echo of wheels fading into distance. He stood motionless in the doorway long after the sound was gone. The house behind him was silent, its hearth cold once more, and as the rain began to fall in earnest, he whispered into the grey, broken air, "Without you, this house is only stone, and I am only a man." The manor did not breathe after the carriage vanished down the road. It held its silence like a sentence, cold and unyielding. Percy stood where Rosalind had last looked back at him, and for a long moment he did not move, as though motion itself would make the loss real. Then he did what he had not done in years. He acted. He went to the study first, not because paper mattered more than blood, but because paper was the weapon the world respected. The fire had dimmed in the hearth, but he fed it until it rose again, bright and fierce, as if the house understood his urgency. He dragged the old ledgers from their shelf, the ones his father had once kept under lock, and the ones Percy had begun to read only after Rosalind's presence made him care what became of Everleigh beyond its haunted reputation. He did not read now for curiosity. He read for survival. Ink, numbers, names, payments that vanished, signatures that repeated too neatly, dates that did not align with harvests or repairs, the same hand everywhere, like a spider's thread woven through every corner of the estate. Sedgwick. Percy's jaw clenched until it ached. He turned pages with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from restrained fury. Then he remembered the strange detail that had unsettled him the first night Rosalind sheltered by the kitchen fire. The faint gap in the stonework, the hidden space behind the old kitchen wall where something had once been tucked away. He did not hesitate. He crossed the corridor with a candle, his boots striking the stone as if the house itself were a drum. He pried at the loose stones with the iron poker. Dust fell. Mortar crumbled. And there, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of letters and a small, sealed packet of documents. Percy's breath stopped when he saw the hand on the first letter. His mother's. The seal had been broken long ago, but the words inside remained sharp as fresh ink. She had written to his father in the last months of her life, pleading that the estate's accounts were not as they seemed, warning him not to trust the steward who spoke too smoothly and bowed too often. Another letter followed, this one from a solicitor in London, mentioning forged notes, coercion, and a widow made convenient scapegoat for debts that do not belong to her. Percy's throat tightened. Rosalind. So it had never been merely gossip. It had been design. He took the packet to the desk and opened it with hands that felt too steady for the rage in his chest. Inside were copies of promissory notes, altered sums, signatures that looked like Rosalind's late husband's, but were slightly wrong at the slant of the letters. There were also receipts bearing Sedgwick's name, payments hidden under the guise of estate maintenance, and one final paper, half-burned at the edges, a memorandum that tied Mrs. Tewkesbury's charity committee to the same circle of debts. Percy stared at it until the candle flame blurred. He whispered, "You used her." The words were not a question, they were a vow. He rang for the groom and for the oldest stable hand, a man whose loyalty had survived even the Manor's abandonment. When they arrived, Percy's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Get my horse ready," he said, "and send for Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor from Cirencester. Tell him to come at once. Tell him it concerns guardianship, fraud, and the name of Everleigh." The stable hand blinked. "Tonight, my lord?" "Now," Percy replied. Within the hour, he was riding hard through grey light and mud, the road slick beneath the hooves, the wind cutting his face like penance. He did not feel the cold. He felt only the image of Rosalind's eyes when she stepped into that carriage, the way her mouth had trembled with bravery, the way she had stood straight while men with clean hands tried to steal the children she had saved with her own life. He reached Stroud by dusk, where the charity house stood like a stern stone box at the edge of town, its windows small, its door watched by a matron who mistook severity for holiness. Percy dismounted without waiting for assistance and pushed inside. The air smelled of boiled turnips and damp wool. Voices echoed down a narrow hall, children crying, women murmuring, footsteps that never fully softened. A clerk approached, startled by his clothes, his bearing, his title even before it was spoken. "My lord," the man stammered, "how may we—" "I'm here for Mrs. Hale and the children taken from Everleigh Manor," Percy said. "You will bring them to me." The clerk swallowed. "My lord, we cannot simply—" Percy's gaze fixed on him, cold and steady. "You will." Something in Percy's voice made the man obey without argument. He hurried away, leaving Percy in the corridor with his breathing and the sound of distant sobbing. Moments later, a door opened. Rosalind stood in the threshold of a small room, her shoulders squared beneath a plain grey cloak the charity house had given her. Her hair was pinned back too tightly, as though she had tried to bind her grief into order. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those grey-green eyes, were the same. Proud, wounded, alive. When she saw him, her composure faltered like a candle in wind. "Percy," she whispered. He crossed the corridor in 2 strides, stopping only when he was close enough to see the faint mark where tears had dried on her cheek. His hand rose, then paused, as if he feared his touch might undo her. "You came," she said, and there was disbelief in the words, as though she had spoken them to a dream. "I told you I would not let them hurt you," he replied. His voice was low, rough with all he had carried on the ride. Her eyes filled instantly. "You should not be here. They will ruin you." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "They already tried. I am done letting other people decide what becomes of my life." Behind her, small faces appeared, 6 children clustered like frightened birds. The youngest girl clung to Rosalind's skirt. The eldest boy stood in front, chin lifted, trying to be brave. Percy knelt to his level. "You have done well," he said softly. "I am proud of you." The boy's eyes shone. "Are we going back?" Percy looked up at Rosalind. The question hung between them like a prayer. "Yes," Percy said at last. "You are going home." Rosalind's breath shook. "Home," she echoed, and the word sounded dangerous on her tongue. Percy stood, his gaze never leaving hers. "You called Everleigh Manor borrowed time," he said. "You were wrong." Her voice was barely a breath. "Do not do this." "I am going to do it," he said, and something in his tone was not command, but devotion. "Not because I am noble, not because I want to play savior, because I love you, Rosalind, and because I refuse to live another day pretending I can bear losing you." Her eyes closed, and when they opened again, tears spilled quietly, unstoppable. "If you say that here," she whispered, "if they hear—" "Let them hear," Percy replied. "Let the whole county hear. Love is not a sin, and protecting children is not scandal." A brisk voice cut into the moment. "This is highly irregular." Mrs. Tewkesbury appeared at the end of the hall, her bonnet rigid, her mouth pinched with indignation. Sedgwick stepped beside her, composed as ever, with the faintest smile, the smile of a man who believed paper and power could bend any truth. "My lord," Sedgwick said smoothly, "this is quite unseemly." Percy did not look away from Rosalind. "Take the children into the room," he said quietly. "Close the door." Rosalind hesitated. Percy's gaze softened. "Trust me," he murmured. The words did not sound like a marquis speaking to a widow. They sounded like a man offering his heart like shelter. Rosalind gathered the children, guiding them inside. The door clicked shut. Percy turned to face the two who had tormented her. The kindness vanished from his expression. "You removed a woman and 6 children without lawful authority," Percy said. "You threatened to separate them. You attempted to extort surrender under the guise of charity." Mrs. Tewkesbury bristled. "We acted in the name of propriety." "In the name of vanity," Percy corrected, and then he lifted the packet of papers he had brought, the edges already worn from his grip. "And in the name of fraud." Sedgwick's smile faltered for the first time. "My lord, you do not understand the nature of estate accounts." "I understand them now," Percy said. "I understand them far better than you intended." He stepped forward, holding the papers as if they were a blade. "You forged notes. You altered sums. You siphoned funds. You used my father's trust, and when he died, you used my absence. You found a widow with no protection and made her convenient. You let the village turn on her, because it suited you." Sedgwick's eyes narrowed. "You accuse me without proof." Percy's voice dropped. "I have proof. I have letters from my mother warning my father about you. I have receipts. I have a memorandum with your name and Mrs. Tewkesbury's committee on it. And I have a solicitor arriving shortly who will file charges that will leave you without your clean coat and your false smile." Mrs. Tewkesbury stiffened. "This is slander." Percy looked at her with quiet contempt. "No, this is consequence." Footsteps sounded behind them. A man in a dark coat entered, Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor, his face grave, his satchel in hand. He bowed to Percy, then turned to Sedgwick and Mrs. Tewkesbury with a look that carried neither fear nor mercy. "I have been informed," Hargreaves said, "that documents exist proving misappropriation of estate funds and coercion involving parish charity." Sedgwick's composure cracked. "This is absurd." "Absurd is not a defense," Hargreaves replied. Percy's voice was steady, lethal in its calm. "And there is more. As Marquis of Everleigh, I am declaring my intent to assume legal guardianship of the 6 children under Mrs. Hale's care, with her as their appointed guardian within my household. The children will not be separated. They will not be traded like coins for your reputation." Mrs. Tewkesbury's lips thinned. A marquis can do many things when his conscience finally awakens," Percy said. Sedgwick took a step back. "You will regret this." Percy did not blink. "No, I will remember it as the first day I stopped being afraid." The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Then from the room behind the closed door came a small sound. One child's quiet sob, muffled, quickly soothed. Percy's eyes flickered toward the door, and his voice softened into something more dangerous than anger. "You will leave now," he said. "You will leave before you force me to decide how far love can go when it is cornered." Hargreaves spoke again, crisp and final. "If you do not leave, I will request immediate intervention from the magistrate. You will not win, Mr. Sedgwick." Now Sedgwick's jaw clenched. His eyes darted, calculating, but for once he found no easy foothold. He turned sharply and strode away, Mrs. Tewkesbury following, her face pale with outrage and fear. When they were gone, Percy stood alone in the corridor, the air suddenly too quiet. He opened the door gently. Rosalind stood inside with the children gathered around her. Her eyes were wide, luminous, trembling with a hope she had tried to bury for years. "It's done?" she whispered. Percy stepped into the room, closing the door behind him as if sealing out the entire cruel world. "It's begun," he corrected softly. "They won't touch you again." Rosalind stared at him, the weight of everything pressing in her throat. "You did not have to do this." "Yes," he said quietly, "I did." Her voice trembled. "Why?" Percy moved closer, stopping just before her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence, close enough that every breath became a confession. "Because the first time you tried to leave," he said softly, "you told yourself the children were safer asleep, that you could go quietly and spare them fear. And it broke you. You turned back. You took them with you. You tried again to be brave alone." Rosalind's lips parted, the truth of it visible in her eyes. "And I found you," Percy continued, "because you have carried everyone else for so long, you forgot you were allowed to be carried too." Tears slid down her cheeks. "Percy!" He lifted his hand, and this time he did not stop himself. His fingers brushed her cheek with reverence, catching a tear as though it were something precious. "I love you," he said again, softer now, like a vow spoken at an altar. Not as a whim, not as a rebellion that fades when the scandal does. "I love you as the only home my heart has ever recognized." Rosalind trembled, her breath uneven. "You will lose everything." He smiled, not bitter now, but tender. "I am gaining everything." The children watched silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. The eldest boy swallowed hard and whispered, "Does that mean she stays?" Percy looked at him, then back at Rosalind. "If she will have me," he said gently, "it means we all stay. Together." Rosalind's voice broke. "You should ask properly." Percy's throat tightened. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small ring, simple, gold, warmed by his hand. "My mother's," he whispered. "I have carried it since I returned. I didn't know why. I think she did." Rosalind's eyes fixed on it, her breath catching as if the sight were too much. Percy lowered himself to one knee, not with theatrical flourish, but with humble certainty that made the room feel sacred. "Rosalind Hale," he said, his voice trembling for the first time, "I have been a man living among ruins. You walked into my abandoned house with nothing but courage and 6 children who needed you, and you made the walls remember what warmth means. Marry me. Not so the world will approve. Not so you will be safe behind my name. Marry me so I can spend the rest of my life proving that love is not charity. It is choice." Rosalind pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking. "Percy, say yes," he whispered, "or tell me no, and I will still fight for you until my last breath. But I am begging you, let me belong to you the way you already belong to me." For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then Rosalind's hand lowered, and her voice emerged like dawn after a long winter. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Percy." A small gasp rose from the children, followed by a soft burst of laughter, as if joy had been trapped in their chests too long and finally broke free. Percy stood slowly, his hands trembling as he slid the ring onto Rosalind's finger. When he looked at her again, his eyes were wet. She reached up, touching his cheek as he had touched hers, her fingers warm, certain. "Do not ruin this with fear," she whispered. "I won't," he breathed. He leaned in, and their kiss was gentle, restrained, full of everything they had denied themselves. No urgency, no hunger, only the slow, trembling certainty of 2 hearts finally allowed to rest. Rosalind's eyes closed as if she were surrendering to something holy. When they parted, Percy kept his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers like a promise. "You're safe," he whispered. Rosalind's voice was barely audible. "So are you." Outside, the rain softened, the sound turning to a hush against the window. as if even the sky had decided to be kind. And in that small room, surrounded by 6 children and the quiet miracle of belonging, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like a hearth. It felt like home. 7 years had passed since the rain that changed everything. 7 years since the grey morning when Rosalind stepped into a carriage, believing she was walking away from love, only to find that love was far stronger than fear. Everleigh Manor no stood forgotten or cold. The once sombre house was alive again, its windows glowing each evening with the warmth of candlelight, its gardens in bloom every spring, its halls filled with laughter. What had once been a place of silence and regret had become a refuge for the living. The villagers no longer whispered about scandal or impropriety. Time, it seemed, had an odd way of humbling rumour. The name of Lord Everleigh, once spoken with caution, now carried a quiet respect. The orphan children Rosalind had brought with her had grown tall and proud under his roof. 2 had gone on to study in Bath with the help of Percy's patronage. The youngest still ran down the marble corridors chasing the dogs, her laughter echoing like bells through the manor. And there were others now. 2 more children, the proof of a love that had not withered with the seasons. A boy with Rosalind's grey-green eyes and Percy's stubborn chin, and a girl with curls the colour of wheat and a will that no one dared challenge. They were born not into privilege, but into peace, something rarer and infinitely more precious. Rosalind sat in the garden that afternoon, beneath the great elm that had once stood forgotten by the lake. She wore a gown of pale blue, her hair streaked now with threads of silver that only made her beauty more arresting. She watched the children play in the grass, the older ones guiding the little ones, the youngest squealing with laughter as she tried to catch a butterfly that danced just out of reach. "Do you remember," said a voice behind her, deep and gentle, "when this garden was only weeds?" She turned, smiling as Percy approached, his coat unbuttoned, a book under one arm. Time had marked him. The lines at the corners of his eyes were deeper, and silver brushed the dark hair at his temples. But his presence had not dimmed. If anything, it had ripened, like good wine left to rest in oak and patience. "I remember," Rosalind said, her smile tender. "You hated this garden." He chuckled softly. "I hated what it reminded me of. The years wasted in grief. The emptiness I once called order." She looked out toward the lake, where the sunlight scattered like gold. "You were never empty, Percy, only waiting." He sat beside her, the familiar ease of their closeness needing no words. For a moment they simply watched the children, their fingers brushing on the bench between them, as naturally as breathing. "Do you ever think of them?" she asked quietly. He knew who she meant. "Sedgwick and Mrs. Tewkesbury?" "Yes." His jaw tightened slightly. "Sedgwick died in debtor's prison 3 winters ago. Hargreaves wrote me of it. As for Mrs. Tewkesbury—" He paused, then shook his head. "She lives still, though not in Stroud. I hear she keeps to a small cottage, more sermon than comfort. The world forgot her, which is, I think, its own justice." Rosalind's gaze softened. "And yet you never spoke their names with hatred." "Hatred burns what it touches," he said simply. "I had too much left to build." She smiled faintly. "You built more than a house, Percy." He turned to her, the afternoon light catching the quiet pride in his eyes. "You gave me reason to." She lowered her gaze, tracing the outline of her wedding ring. "I used to fear this happiness, you know. I thought it was borrowed time, that one day the world would come knocking again. And has it?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with peace. "No, it learned to leave us be." He reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You were always the braver of us both." "Not braver," she murmured. "Only certain that love must be tended, like this garden. Left alone, even beauty fades." Percy smiled, his thumb resting lightly against her chin. "Then you've tended me well, Mrs. Everleigh." She laughed softly, a sound that had not lost its music in 7 years. "And you, my lord, have made an honest woman of me." He leaned in, their foreheads meeting for a moment of quiet communion. Around them, the world moved, wind through leaves, laughter of children, the distant toll of the church bell marking the hour. But within that small space there was only stillness. A small boy ran toward them then, breathless and wild with excitement. "Papa, Mama, look!" He held a bird's nest in both hands, delicate as lace, inside it 3 pale eggs trembling with life. Percy crouched beside him. "Careful, Thomas. The mother will want those back." The boy frowned. "But I found them." Rosalind bent down, her voice gentle. "And the mother will be grateful you kept them safe. Sometimes loving something means letting it stay where it belongs." The boy thought for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "All right, Mama." He carried the nest back to the tree, careful as a young steward of the earth. Percy watched him go, then turned to Rosalind with quiet admiration. "You always know the right words." "I learned from you," she said. He shook his head. "No, you taught me everything that mattered." The sun began to dip, painting the garden in amber light. The eldest of the children called for them from the path. Dinner, it seemed, was ready, and the younger ones were gathering flowers for the table. Rosalind stood, taking Percy's arm. Together they walked toward the house, their steps slow, content. As they reached the terrace, Rosalind paused to look back. The manor stood framed by the twilight, its walls glowing soft and golden. She remembered the first night she had seen it, dark, unwelcoming, the firelight flickering behind closed shutters. It was hard to believe this was the same place. Percy followed her gaze. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming here?" "No, staying." She looked at him for a long moment. Not for a single breath. Inside, the table was set with wildflowers gathered by small hands. The laughter of children filled the air. Percy poured the wine. Rosalind cut the bread. There was no ceremony to it, no grandeur, just the quiet splendor of a family at peace. Later, after the house had gone still, Rosalind walked out onto the balcony. The moon was full, silvering the fields where once only frost had lived. Percy joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You should rest," he murmured. "In a moment," she said. "I was thinking." "Of what?" She smiled faintly. "Of how much can change in 7 years. Once I thought love was a storm, all thunder and breaking things apart. But now I see it's more like the tide. It returns again and again, reshaping the shore." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And what has it shaped for us?" She turned to him, her voice tender. "Home." He drew her close, his arm around her waist, and they stood together, watching the night stretch over the valley that had once been haunted by silence. The wind carried the faint laughter of their children from within the house, distant, warm, eternal. After a while, Percy spoke again, his voice a whisper against her hair. "When I met you, I thought my life had already ended. I did not know it was only beginning." Rosalind closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart that had once been so guarded. "Then let us promise," she said softly, "that even when the years steal our strength, we will still find each other here, in this garden, in this house, in the sound of the rain." He smiled against her hair. "Always." The moon rose higher, bathing Everleigh Manor in its quiet grace. The elm trees whispered, the fields slept, and the hearth within the great house glowed steady and golden. It was not a perfect life, no love worth living ever is, but it was enduring. Forged from ruin, tempered by faith, and tended with the patience of 2 hearts that had learned that love, like spring, can come again and again, even after the longest winter. And so it did. There are stories that fade when the last word is spoken, and others that stay with us, quietly reminding us that love, true love, is never lost, only waiting to be found again. The tale of Rosalind and Percy is one of those. It teaches us that redemption is possible, that healing often begins in the simplest of gestures, a shared silence, a glance across a storm, a hand offered when the world has turned away. Their journey reminds us that the heart can bloom again, even after years of winter. It shows us that home is not made of walls or titles, but of people who choose to love, forgive, and build anew. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that it is never too late to begin again, never too late to open the door when love comes quietly knocking. If this story touched your heart, tell us what part moved you most in the comments. And if you truly made it to the very end, write the word Everleigh below, a small tribute to the house where love was reborn. That one word will let me know that you were there, feeling every moment until the final line. To those who wish to support the team that brings these timeless romances to life, you can leave a super thanks on YouTube. Any amount, from the heart, helps us continue creating these stories filled with passion, history, and hope. And if supporting financially isn't possible right now, simply sharing this story with friends or family means the world to us. It helps our little community of dreamers grow, one heart at a time. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your presence here turns each tale into something unforgettable, and if you wish to keep traveling through worlds of love, courage, and destiny, explore the other romances waiting for you in the cards above, each one ready to steal a piece of your heart, because somewhere beyond time and circumstance, love, like Everleigh, always finds its way home.